When Seiko killed off the SKX a couple years back, it left a pretty big hole in the affordable watch market. And since then, there's been a lot of great options coming from a lot of different places trying to fill that hole. The watch we're looking at today fits into that category, but this one comes with some upgrades over the SKX and comes in at a really phenomenal price. Today we're checking out the Merkur Seizenn Diver. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave and I live in Japan and I love to collect affordable watches. So this is a channel all about budget watch collecting. Now the Seiko SKX was one of the most legendary affordable divers ever created, and unfortunately Seiko has killed it off. It's no longer being produced and prices on it have skyrocketed, leading a lot of people to try and find good alternatives. And Seiko themselves seems to have gotten the idea of replacing the SKX by coming out with their Seiko Sports Diver, which is basically a Seiko SKX with an upgraded movement and some visual enhancements, but with the reduction of the water resistance from 200 down to 100 meters. But micro brands and Chinese brands have also been getting in on the game of trying to come up with their own SKX replacements, and that's where this Merkur Seizenn Diver fits in. And this is, I think, one of the best SKX inspired watches that I've seen, and it comes in at a pretty amazing price. The retail price I think is $150, but they often run sales. When I'm filming this, it was at 15% off, so it's down to like $125, which is pretty crazy for what they're offering you. Now, Merkur did give me this watch for free in order to do this review, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any compensation from Merkur, nor did they have any input into the content of this review. Now, Merkur is a micro brand based out of China. They do a lot of collaborations with smaller social media groups and forums and things like that that have produced some really interesting watches. And they also do some of their own original work. Typically, their business model is that they produce relatively limited runs of their watches, and after they sell out, they may or may not do another one. They might switch on to something different. So if you're interested in this watch, I would recommend picking it up soon, because there's no guarantee that it'll necessarily be around a couple months from now. I feel like this diver kind of takes the best from the Seiko SKX and the Seiko 5 Sports line and combines them together with a few little interesting additions that are sort of make it unique to their own. So this is not a straight up copy of the SKX. There are some visual differences, which I really appreciate in homages. I'm not a big fan of those one-to-one copies, although I can see their appeal. So I like it when there's a little bit of creativity added to make something just a little bit unique. Anyways, let's look at the specifications and dimensions on this watch to give you a feel of what you're getting for that pretty unbelievable $150 price. You are getting the full 200 meters water resistance with a screw down crown, a sapphire crystal, and the Seiko NH36 Automatic movement. Dimensions, this one's coming in at 42 millimeters across. Now they have it listed as 40 millimeters on their site, but that is the width of the bezel. If you measure the entire case, it's 42 millimeters. You're getting 22 millimeter lugs, and they list the height on the site as 14 millimeters. I'm measuring it as 13 millimeters, so a little bit slimmer, which is good to see there. Additionally, you're getting a really fantastic Jubilee style bracelet with solid end links and just a really smoothly operating clasp and really nice finishing all the way around. And especially at this price range, it's really impressive to see a bracelet of this quality on this watch. Now again, talking about the design, this is very heavily inspired by the Seiko SKX. And like I said, I feel like it kind of takes some of the best parts of the SKX, some of the best parts of the Seiko 5 Sports Diver, and some new additions and sort of mashes it all together to make this really appealing package. From the SKX, you're getting that case shape and design. The dimensions are all very clearly heavily inspired by the SKX. The dial design and layout is very similar to the SKX, and you're getting that 200 meters of water resistance with a screw down crown. From the Seiko Sports line, they're taking that upgraded movement. In this case, you have the Seiko NH36, which is basically the same as the Seiko 4R36, which is in the Seiko 5 Sports watches. So it has hacking and hand winding, day-date complication, really good reliability and robustness. One of the great things that the Seiko 5 Sports line did is that they created a almost limitless number of different iterations of it. You can get different dial colors, different bezel options, all sorts of different things. And so I feel like this Merkur kind of took some of that inspiration. The bezel is very similar to the bezel that you'll see on some of those Seiko 5 Sports. It's a really beautiful, really well done stainless steel bezel with a really sharply milled out numerals on the bezel and kind of a frosted texture underneath it with high polish on the numerals. Looks great, really solidly built. The dial is this sort of fume effect where you have this kind of light green in the middle that gets out to almost black at the edges. Kind of a cool look there. And they also took the applied markers that you find on the Seiko 5 Sports line and brought them into this one. But this is not a watch from Seiko. As you can immediately tell by looking at it, there are some key differences. The most obvious is the handset is completely different from the SKX. This is kind of like a little bit of a cross between like a Mercedes hand without the lines in the middle of it. So kind of like a lollipop hour hand, fairly simple minute hand. And I appreciate that they didn't go with the Mercedes handset or the Seiko handset, that they did go in a different direction. That said, I don't particularly like this handset. It's not my favorite looking one, but it gets the job done. And the dial, I believe, is unique to this watch. I'm not aware of any other watches out there that use the same dial color with that green to black fade on it. So that's a little bit of originality. Another big upgrade is the sapphire on the glass. Seiko will only give you hardlex at this price range, so it's great to see the sapphire crystal here. Now, one area that's a little bit confusing, and so the original SKX was a divers rated 200 meter water resistance, which meant it complied with the Japanese diving standards and testing procedures. To get that certification, a watch has to go through a lot of extra steps. There's also a Swiss ISO equivalent of that. So to see a watch with divers 200 meters written on the dial typically means that the watch has gone through some really strenuous verification to test that it can actually function at the full stated water resistance on the dial. This watch says divers 200 meters on the dial. I don't believe it has undergone any official certification. So if you follow the rules, I don't believe it's supposed to have divers written on the dial here. I would assume this simply means that Merkur has tested the watch in-house to their own standards. They do some pretty good testing on their watches, but I'm sure it's not to the same rigors as like an ISO certification would be. So that would be the one thing that is probably a little bit misleading about this watch. Finally, one of the biggest differences between this watch and anything that Seiko offers is the price. If you can pick this watch up at a discount and get it for $125, it's pretty insane what they're offering here. So looking at the design and the specifications and all that, you're probably going to wonder next, does the build quality hold up at that price? And well, I think there have been a few corners cut. Overall, I think it does pretty well. The finishing on the case work is really well done. You have very sharp and clearly defined brushing and polish sections. The case is very beautiful with this kind of sleek, curved shape to it with a nice bevel going along the top edge of the case. Nice swooping lugs as well. Again, not very original because it's taken largely from the SKX, but the finishing is pretty well done, again, especially at this price range. The bezel is very impressive. The cutouts on the markers are done very sharply, very crisply. Nice high polish on those. It looks great. And the bezel action is pretty good as well. So this bezel action feels a lot like Seiko's bezel action. If you've felt a Seiko watch, it has a very different bezel action from a lot of other ones. It's a little bit more springy, a little spongy sometimes. This retains that feeling, but it feels crisper and more defined. I like it better than Seiko's bezels. Except that after having this watch for about a month or so and taking it into the water once or twice, the watch has developed a little bit of extra resistance on the bezel at certain positions. So sometimes you'll be turning it very smoothly and you'll kind of hit a snag where you got to add extra force. So I would have liked to have seen that not do that and kind of retain the same bezel action throughout it. But so far it hasn't gotten to the point where the bezel has actually seized up and stopped. I can still turn it. There's just some parts where there's added resistance, which is a little bit of a concern. One other concern with the finishing is that there are some sharp edges on this, most noticeably on that bezel. So those numbers that are cut out are very sharply cut out, and they're very sharp to the touch as well. If you run your finger over them, you can definitely feel the edges. It's kind of a little bit alarming. And since they are high polished, they tend to pick up fingerprints and markings, and you might want to polish those out. But if you run a polishing cloth over that, it kind of catches on the edges of that. So very sharp there. And then on the underside of the crown guards, there is a little bit of sharpness. It's not as bad as the top. It's not painful or anything, but it is noticeable. I would have liked to see the underside of that crown guard smoothed out a bit so that when you're operating the crown, you don't feel that scraping against your finger. But I wouldn't say it's quite a deal breaker. Maybe the thing that blew me away the most about this watch was the bracelet that they included on this. This is a very beautiful Jubilee style bracelet that is very solidly made. Now, like most bracelets of this style, it has a little bit of flex built into it, which adds some additional comfort to the watch. However, it still feels very solid. It's not like a very rattly bracelet. It feels very secure. It has solid links and solid end links, which again is something that you will not find from offerings from Seiko or Orient at this price range. And it has a great clasp as well. Fully milled clasp, operates very smoothly, flip lock and push button, fully milled inside, and 3 micro adjusts. So to get this bracelet in a watch that you can find for as cheap as $125 new is pretty insane. for a lot of dive watches that get the price down to this range, you'll find a sapphire crystal, you'll find the Seiko NH35 or 36 movement inside of it, but usually you're not going to get very good finishing, and a lot of times you're not going to get a very good bracelet. You might get some sharp edges on the bracelet or a clasp that isn't very smooth to operate, and that will be, sort of the trade-off for getting things down at that price range. I have seen $500-$600 watches that don't have a bracelet as nice as this one, so it definitely is going to blow away anything that you're going to find, even from Seiko or Orient's entry-level offerings. Finally, we got to check out the lume on this watch, and this is an area where it does not live up to its Seiko inspiration. The lume on this watch is about average, but Seiko is definitely above average. They've got Swiss Superluminova C3, which has kind of a green tinge in the daylight, which I think matches well with the colorway of this watch. And then you get a nice bright green glow in the dark. I put this watch up against a Spinnaker and a Vostok in my collection, and it handily beat both of those, coming in with a J score of 5. But that means that it's about half as bright as the Seiko Samurai. So Seiko's entry-level dive watches have about double the brightness of this one. But again, it's still pretty good brightness. It beats out a lot of comparably priced Chinese watches that I've tested and a lot of micro brands that I've tested as well. So overall, I feel like this watch is a pretty incredible value for everything that they're offering. One of the best that I've seen. If you like that Seiko SKX look, if you're looking for something that kind of gives you that feel, while adding a couple of twists and a couple of upgrades to it, I think this is a great one to check out. For me, the biggest negatives were the handset on there. Again, it just didn't really connect with me, and those little bit of sharp edges at some points. But I feel like both of those are kind of minor compared to the amount of value that they're putting into this watch. So I would definitely encourage you guys to go check it out. If any of you guys love watches and wear t-shirts and are looking for some cool watch themed t-shirts like this one, I'm selling this shirt along with a lot of others on my t-shirt store. Go check that out. You can get some really cool stuff there. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for today. As always, I love to hear from you guys in the comments, so let me know what you think of this watch or the SKX in general, or what you think is the best SKX replacement from all the different ones that have come out. But that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.